that evening sun go down that old Devil River. Oh, I hates to see that evening sun go down. Where's my pants? You don't mind if I wear my shades when I do this tonight, do you? I've got pictures painted on the inside of the lenses of my shades, and they provide a certain inspiration. I hates to see that evening sun. Would you please bring that up in there? There you go, garçon. Garçon. I hates to see that evening sun go down, go down. I hates to see that evening sun go down. And now for the next 45 minutes, this fantastically involved and concerned and very worried radio station brings you 45 minutes to unwind from all the cares of the day and all the yelling newscasters and all the beeps and all that stuff. Those are pretty good commercials. You can sure tell it ain't the Martha Dean show. Oh, a lot of things we have to report here before we get involved here tonight. Excuse me, I got to tune my instruments here. Very good. Nice sound, wasn't it? Yes, sir. All right, let's get some... We have a little report here from you. A little note here. I've been... More and more, I've been noticing a very bad trend. There's all kinds of elections going on, as you know. And there's all kinds of biased statements being made and all kinds of rabble-rousing being done. And I'm driving along the turnpike the other day, and there's a big sign that beseeched me to vote for that crummy, rotten tiger. Have you seen those signs? Well, I'm probably, I know that I'm in the minority here, but for a long time I felt that the ad manager has been getting short shrift. I have not seen one sign that says, vote for the ad manager. And frankly, I'm going to vote for a person over a tiger anytime. Did I ever tell you the story of my kid brother? Who, you tell him about tigers, man, and he just doesn't buy the story. One time he was in the Army, in the Air Force, actually. And he was assigned to Burma. Now, I don't know whether you know about Burma, friends, but that is not exactly Teaneck. And he was assigned way out in the boondocks in Burma. I mean in the boondocks. In fact, he said that he was living in this basha. And the basha is this kind of little shack that's up on stilts. Kind of stands up there in the mud. And every night, when the monsoon season is rocking down, whether you know what the monsoon season is. Well, the monsoon season is just, it rains night and day, and it's hot and stinky. And he said that he'd lay there in his sack at night. He could hear the rats fist fighting and the mongooses taking on the cobras right under his bed. You know, the pad was raised up on these sticks. And he says you could hear him down there, raising Cain, yelling and hollering in the mud down there. And so, you know, he's kind of, hello, test there. He's kind of getting attuned to that life out there in Burma, taking things kind of easy. And they had this transmitter shack. Now, you engineers think you've had troubles. Listen to this. His job was to maintain a high-powered transmitter, which was a big transmitter used to transmit Air Force weather information over the over the Himalayas, right there in the middle of Allen Ginsberg country. You know, it's right there where, oh, yeah, there were more guys sitting around, he says, contemplating their navel than you'd care to shake a stick at. He said there was more yak blood and yak butter drunk around there. He says there were love beads and bells going every night, and the vultures were flapping around there and picking up the victims. He said it was a great place. So, yeah. And he says that they had the transmitter shack out there in the boondocks, about 75 or maybe 100 yards back in the jungle, and they had this cleared place. They had these big rhombic antennas up there, and this little shack was right in the middle of it all. And, of course, very hot there. And so they had it all screened in, a little screened-in porch. It was raised up off the ground and had little steps going up there. And he was on the midnight shift. And so this transmitter would lay off about 7, 8 o'clock at night, and it would go back on the air again something like 2 in the morning, see? So it would be off for about 4 or 5 hours. And one morning it's actually about 11 o'clock at night. He's laying there, and he's got the malaria and the pip, and he's got the dengue fever. He said, let me tell you, he says, that guru doesn't tell you much about dengue fever. He said, boy, he says, the power of positive thinking does not work when you have dengue fever, which is better known as bone break fever. It is a fever that makes you feel like every miserable bone in your body has been busted into tiny pieces and fed to the maggots. Okay? So he's laying there and the sweat is pouring off of him, and, he's cursing the day that Burma was ever created, and the mongoose are fighting the cobras under his pad there, and all of a sudden the light shines into his basha, and it's the first sergeant, and he hollers, "Hey, Shepard, you got 15 minutes to get on a stick." And so he wakes up out of his you see, those of you who are interested in psychedelia, if you really want to have some unbelievable hallucinations, get yourself a good case of Burmese malaria. You will have hallucinations, friend, that just do not stop. He said that for over 6 months, he was having a fantastic dialogue. He said a very philosophical dialogue with a doorknob. And he said this, and he said, you get like that with this and you drink the quinine water they give you and all this stuff, and you turn yellow and your eyeballs are green. And he says you got the heat rash and all that. So he's lying in the sack one night, and this first sergeant says, "Hey, Shepard, you got 15 minutes to get on a stick." Well, okay. So he's lying there in this pool of sweat, and Burmese sweat is really sweat. And he's lying in this pool of sweat, and he can hear somewhere off in the distance the temple bells ringing and the sun coming up like, what is it, out of China across the bay and all that stuff. And way off in the distance in the darkness hangs the mysterious Himalayas. There, the Himalaya mountains reaching up and touching the sky. And in the distance, he could sense Tibet in an off mountain wind. He said one night 2 Tibetans came into camp there, and he said they sat facing the wall all night long drinking yak blood. He said, well, all right. He says, every man's got his own thing to do. He said, I'm not going to put them down for doing their thing. He said, after all, I'm sitting there having a long conversation with the doorknob, so you know what, the 6 of one, half dozen the other. So do you find this an interesting story? It ain't exactly Fay Henley. And so he's lying in the sack there, or Sandy Lesbird for that matter, so he's lying there, he's tossing in his pool of sweat, and, it's just pouring out of him, and he's dreading. You know those minutes when you dread to get up? Oh, boy, he'd been in the Burmese jungle for years before that. He said there was a handbook that the British Army had that no man could stand living in the Burmese jungles in the area he was in for more than 1 year. Absolutely. He would rot of pure mildew if the vultures wouldn't get him first, or get stepped on by a sacred cow, or get hit by a cobra. He said everything was going on there. And he says if they didn't get you, the Japs would. So he's lying there. He's lying there in his sack now. It is in his 3rd year in this jungle. He has exceeded the overload limit by 2 full years. And by now, life is one long hallucination. He says every once in a while, one of the guys would run out of the basha and start talking in unknown tongues. And he'd bellow it out at the moon, and they'd call the chaplain, and the chaplain would give him whatever the chaplains give him. They'd wave this thing around him and throw incense on him, and the next thing you know, they'd fly him all the way back to the headquarters base and tie him up in a cold sack and put him in hot water for a month, and then send him right back. He said it was one long scene. So this morning, and this has to do with the tiger, friends, this morning, he is lying in his sack, just lying there, sweating. And he knows that in 5 minutes he's got to get up. So he gets up, and he says, it's funny. He says, they had these aluminum dog tags. He says, you would never guess that aluminum could rust. He says that it was so humid there that even the aluminum rusted. He said that aluminum was rusting, and he had these rusty dog tags, and he's shaking with malaria. He's got bone break fever. He gets up out of the sack. He puts on his GI fatigues. He said, my fatigues were a walking compost heap. He said, my fatigues had not been in the laundry since I had been in Actually, he says, it was in Randolph Field. 3.5 years before was the last time they saw the laundry. So he puts on his fatigues. He says they were cut off right above the knee. He says they weren't actually cut off. They were worn off to above the knee. And so he's got these sandals. He said they didn't start out to be sandals. They were originally GI shoes, but they had rotted away and his toes were sticking out. This is the real nitty-gritty Army we're talking about. So he takes his flashlight, his GI flashlight, these brown flashlights, you know, the kind you see surplus now for 12 cents, and he goes off into the boondocks by himself. And the howling wilderness is all around him. He can hear cobras snapping at his sandals, and once in a while a mongoose goes scurrying through the woods, and he hears this, you know, the constant roar of the jungle. The rain is coming down, and now he sees the dim outline ahead of him of the transmitter shack, which is dead, stark quiet, nothing. And he sees those big poles of the rhombic antennas stretching up into the murky sky. And he shakes himself. Oh, man, was Sherman right? What a drag. And his teeth are knocking together with the you know, it's the business with the, you got to understand, when you have an advanced case of malaria, your teeth shake, you know, you alternately sweat your excuse me, that was censored. You alternately sweat your you-know-what off, or you're having these fantastic chills. He says, I was right in the middle of a chill cycle. His teeth are gone. He said, and all of a sudden it's 40 degrees below zero in the jungle, and he knows it's 105 degrees there, and it's 158% humidity. The rain is coming down. You can smell the humus, and you can smell the jungle, the swamp all around him. And he goes up the steps, the screen door, and he's half delirious with this malaria, and he's supposed to turn the transmitter on and heat it up. He says, heat it up. He says, those tubes, let me tell you, he says, when we turned the filaments on the tubes there, it actually cooled them. He said, it was so hot there that you didn't need filaments. He says, those babies ran by themselves. And he says, he goes in, there's black in this place, and he slams the door open, and he could smell the transformers, and he could smell the rack and panel, and he could smell all the insulation and the spittoons, and he could smell the sergeant's shoes, which he left under the desk, the whole scene. This is the real Army, see. And he goes into this place, it's dark, and his little flickering, he says, we had been so far out of touch with our home base that the last batteries we got were over 2 years old. And this little flickering yellow bulb he had, you know, this little yellow light, and he shines it in there trying to look for the you know, trying to work his way through all the test equipment and junk, when he is suddenly aware. Now remember, he is in the throes of a first-degree malarial hallucination. His teeth are going. He is suddenly aware of two great big shining green light bulbs that have suddenly materialized off to his left where he knew the workbench was. There were no green light bulbs over there. He peers through the darkness. His teeth and he turns his little flashlight over there, which is the little yellow beam, is about like well, actually it had about the same power as one birthday candle. That, you know, those little pink birthday candles. He lights this thing and shines it over here. He cannot believe what he sees. There, sitting at the beam of his little yellow flashlight, he said, was the biggest, angriest, menacing, furry, be-toothed, be-whiskered, bloodthirsty, the biggest, rottenest, toughest mother of a tiger he ever saw in his life. He says that son of a gun was 17 feet high. He said he had more stripes. He says those eyeballs, he says that's what he was seeing, those two great big fantastic green eyeballs. He says that tiger opened his mouth. He says that mouth, believe me, was as big as Lincoln Center, lined with teeth. He said that mouth opened up and it just went, ah. He said it made a kind of a gurgling sound down in his throat. Well, he says immediately he is struck. Is this a hallucination? Is this another light bulb? And the tiger went, and stood up. He said, it was then that I realized it was not a hallucination. This baby was about to have another... He said he left that transmitter shack. He said between the transmitter shack and his basha, the next morning they found one footprint. His left foot hit the ground. He said it was only 75 feet. He's a fantastic leap he made. Well, he hit the ground running in that barracks, in the back. He said, there's a tiger in the transmitter shack. And the other three guys who were asleep in the same basha all looked up out of their malarial deliriums. So what? You know, their dreams were peopled with drunken rhinoceri, King Kongs, whatnot. It's a real tiger. Out there is a tiger, you guys. And the first sergeant says, all right, let's go look. And they all picked up their Roscoes. They went out through the same howling jungle. And there was the transmitter shack. The door torn right off of it. That tiger left for parts unknown. But he was out in that black night, watching all of them. He said for 3 nights after that, they could see him circling around the basha with those green eyes, just watching, just waiting. Yeah. Vote for the tiger, friends. Vote for the tiger. He's your friend. With those old diamond rings. Ho, 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 ho. Oh, you's a crummy old St. Louis lady. And I knows about St. Louis ladies. Don't you kid yourself, baby. Ba-ba-boo. With your diamond rings and your sweet talk. With all the funny fancy dresses you wear. Ba-ba-boo, ba-ba-ba-ba-boo. Ba-ba-ba-boo. Ba-ba-boo-boo-boo. Ba-ba-boo, ba-ba-boo, ba-ba-da-doo, da-doo-doo-doo. Ba-ba-boo-ba-boo. Ba-ba-boo-boo-boo. Ba-ba-ba-ba-boo-doo-doo. Ba-ba-boo. Da-da-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. Do-do-do-do-do-do. I hear you talking. Ba-ba-boo-ba-boo-doo-doo. Oh, you St. Louis lady, I know you're kind. Oh, St. Louis woman, with your diamond rings. Whoa. Yeah, it's very nice. That ain't exactly Robert Goulet. But then Robert Goulet couldn't do that either. I got the heat. Oh, speaking of them bad tigers, this is WOR. And we're right here in the heart of the big mire and the big swamp of AM radio. Boy, if they talk about television being a wasteland, holy smokes. Okay, that's a great commercial. All right, now, let's get back to this. I want to finish this thing about the tiger, just to show you what's going on out there. We got a letter from this kid. He says, Shepard, I'm writing you because I've got the war in the world. Oh, no, that's something else. Excuse me. That's an interesting letter. I can't read it on the air. How did that get in here? Holy smokes. It says, today, halfway through English as usual, my friend and me started talking about last night's show. We were talking about the tiger and the ad manager vote. We thought it was eminently unfair that the ad manager had no campaign, so we, being fair-minded citizens, decided to start one. I immediately opened up my notebook, and ripping squares of paper out of my notebook, writing slogans, some of yours, some of ours, and variations on the original ones. Then we secretly passed these out so that our English teacher wouldn't take a fit. Then we went to gym. In the locker room, oh, that locker room, where I could have learned the facts of life, but never did. We started screaming, quote, vote for the ad manager, you clunks! That's a good line. Kill that cat! That's kind of nice. Here's a nice slogan. Tigers kill 367 people a year by eating them. That gets to the heart of it. And here's another one. Who wants a man-eating tiger instead of an ad manager who is somebody's father and is kind of cute? That kind of gets to that. Here's a nice one. You're stupid if you vote for a cutesy tiger. Or, take the tiger out of the tank and put him under the tire. Holy smokes. I don't want to go that far. He says, after this, we did the 100-yard dash. When I finished, I went to the 50 yards mark, and the kids whizzed by. I would yell, vote for the ad manager. Of course, by the time I finished saying it, they were gone, but most of the kids started on our side. In our study hall, we made more signs. Outside after lunch, we convinced more people to vote for the ad manager. We sense now, Shepard, a groundswell of pro-ad manager vote. That tiger's going to be out of office by next spring. We came in passing out more signs. Even now, I'm writing this letter in reading. Our English teacher is lecturing us on various things, including the fact that he is for the tiger, of course. I just thought you ought to know that subversives are working ever. Speaking of subversives, did you read this wild little note in the Times? I don't know whether this got out on any of the news, but this is the great little kind of piece that if you keep your eye out, it really tells the tenor of the times. Listen to this one. The 2-week-old ideological battle between an importer of voodoo dolls and the International Longshoremen's Association flared again yesterday. Did you read that piece? The battle flares on a shipment of Irish-made dolls of Mao Zedong and Charles de Gaulle, intended for sale to New Yorkers who may be in need of relieving personal feelings by sticking pins into the 12-inch representatives. It appears to have at least reached the truth stage last Friday when a group for the Yeoman Group, a spokesman for the Yeoman Group importers, explained the gag nature of the dolls and added that a tongue-in-cheek selection of quotations from Mao's Little Red Book, printed in French and English, had been packed into each doll. An ILA study of the quotations, a union spokesman said, had convinced the dock workers on Pier 76, Hudson River, that the quotations consisted of dangerous red Chinese propaganda. The dolls have been held up since May 14th by a refusal of the dockers to move the shipment. The spokesman added that the longshoremen would continue to refuse to handle the shipment. One of the quotations from Mao's Little Red Book that stuck in with the dolls declares, "Liberalism is extremely harmful." End of quote. Another advocated, we quote, "Every woman who can work to take her place on the labor front. Every woman must work." That did not go down good with the dock workers. The Mao dolls depict the Chinese leader with one hand in front, clasping his book, and the other behind his back, holding a bomb. I don't know. I wonder what the de Gaulle one shows. Is this a doll that you wind up and it runs like hell? And hides in the bushes? I don't know. But nevertheless, I'm just curious, but these great battles go on during our times, and nobody comments on them. Of course, there's battles that go on continually, and I'm driving out along Route 206 the other day on the way to the airport, and there's a kid sitting out there in the front yard, and he's got a card table. And he's sitting there, and he's looking very official, and attached to the front of his card table is a sign. It said, "Worms for sale." This kid's sitting in the front yard selling worms. Well, I couldn't help but, pull over to the side, and I stick my head out the window, and I say, "Hey, kid." And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Are them fresh worms?" He said, "Yeah. What do you think?" I said, "Well, I thought I'd ask. Nothing worse than a dead worm." "Yeah, they're fresh," he says. And then I went on, I says, "How did you catch them?" He said, "I dug them. How do you think, stupid?" Obviously, this kid, was right with the PR scene. I said, "Well, stupid, there are better ways to catch worms, stupid." And his jaw dropped. He said, "Yeah?" I said, "Yeah, stupid. I asked because I was going to give you a tip. But now that you call me chowderhead and stupid, forget it. You're going to be digging worms the rest of your life." He sat there for a minute by his card table, and he says, "Fink?" And I says, "You dumb kid." And then there's another pregnant pause, and I said, "Hey, kid!" And he said, "What do you want?" I said, "Are you a teenage expert?" And he looked at me and said, "What do you think?" I said, "You got the stupid look of a teenage expert. I bet you think wide track and Pontiacs are the best cars in the world, right?" And there's a pregnant pause. He says, "Right, stupid grown-up." I says, "Okay, stupid teenage expert Fink. Keep on digging them worms. I know a better way." I put my car in first, the transmission ground to a halt. I put it in second, which is the only gear that works, and I left. So I just thought you ought to know that the battle goes on. And I received a letter today from a kid. Now, it could be the same kid who probably didn't know who he was talking to. Oh, yeah, I'll tell you. One kid grabbed me down in the village the other day, and he grabbed me by the elbow, and he says... and he has this button on that says "Flick Lips," and he says to me, he says, "Excuse me, sir, could you tell me which way I can get to the paper book gallery?" And I said, "It's down there, you turn left." I said, "You go half a block down the street, it's by the Howard Johnson." And he looked at me. He says, "Thank you." And then he says to his friend, he says, "Oh boy, these stupid grown-ups." And away we he's got a sign that says "Flick Lips." So, you're six at one, half does the other. And I have a little note from this kid. I don't know quite why I'm telling you all this tonight, but it seems right. This little note, and he says, "Shepard, would you please," very important, he said, "I'm having trouble. Would you please tell me of the great electrical system," once again repeated, on the air, the great electrical system you had for catching worms. Now, I thought I'd warn any of you out there that the next 10 minutes I'm going to talk about worms. So all of you ladies out there that can't take straight talk about the simple little life forms that live on this planet with you, these simple little forms, without which we would be in a lot of trouble, friends, without those simple little... Oh, yes. Do you know that the Agricultural Department says that the single greatest asset that the world of agriculture has is the simple little pink earthworm? Do you know that? So don't put the earthworm down, friends. And at one time, I earned my living on the earthworm. And I grew to love earthworms. And you get so that you know, yes, you know earthworms, and you get to have your favorites among the worms. And I was about, I'd say about 10. It was about this time of the year, June. This is when the fishing fever bites guys all over the country. And they start casting about. Get a boat and go someplace out, get away from it all, and fish for crappies or bullheads, other great fighting fish. And you see the little signs beginning to sprout up all along the outskirts of little towns around that say worms for sale here. Well, in each one of those houses, there is a kid, usually, who is in the worm business. And it's not a business that is talked about much, but it's an important part of the sporting life of America. And I'm a retired worm grower, retired worm salesman, and a retired worm digger. I involved myself in all of the various facets of the industry so that I'd know it from the ground up, so to speak. And so I began at the age of 10. When every Saturday, my old man, just about this time of the year, would decide to go out to Cedar Lake with his friend Heine Gertz and Zudak, and they would rent this rowboat for $1.50 an hour. It was made out of lead, and they would row out to the middle of Cedar Lake and swear and tell dirty stories and drink beer until 4 o'clock in the morning and fight mosquitoes. And, once in a great while, as a great favor, the old man would invite me along. Well, in between times, he would keep me on the edge of the hook like that by saying, look, now, if you go out and get worms from me and Zudak and Heine, if you get the worms this week, maybe in a couple of weeks we'll take you along. And so I would rush like mad out in the back. Kids are always being euchred. No wonder kids wind up being alienated. I'll tell you, I was constant. And yeah, you know what the old man would do then? He would go out all Saturday night, fish for crappies, see. And he would come back like at 4 o'clock in the morning, and he would throw the bag of crappies, which he kept on a stringer, the metal stringer, in a burlap bag. He'd have about 58 crappies, and he would throw them on the back porch, and he would wake me up, and he'd say, surprise. And I'd say, what, Dad? And I'm tired, I'm 10. He'd say, surprise, would you like to go fishing with us next month? I'd say, yeah, wow. He'd say, I'll tell you what you do now. If you really want to be a fisherman, you got to learn how to fish now. The first thing you got to learn how to do is to clean the fish. Well, do I have to tell you the next part of the scene? I would be out next to the garage. I don't know whether you have ever cleaned 48 or 57 crappies. And, crappies live in the mud. They're a special type of fish. They eat old inner tubes and beer cans and stuff like that. When you're cleaning these crappies, they're very gamey, and they fight, and they're made out of hard rubber and stuff. And the dogs for miles around come around, knee-deep. You're knee-deep in cats and raccoons and dogs. And Bruner comes over and says, oh, boy, look at the heads there. Look at that one still alive. Look at his fur. Look at his teeth are going. Oh, wow. And you're cleaning the fish. And for at least 10 days after that, I mean, every girl that you ever knew or any kid that you know that walks up to you and says, ooh, wow, do you stink? Oh, wow. Well, that's part of life. Now, I know a lot of you kids think that fish come in the bird's eye frozen food box. But there's more to fish than you see. And so I'm working my way up this fishing scene. And the old man then would start with the worms. He'd say, now, look. He'd say, now, if you get me some worms, maybe Zudak and I and Heine will take you next month. Now, you get me some worms by Saturday. And so out I go. Everybody else is playing second base and hitting out flies. And I'm out in the boondocks and the dumps, every place I'm digging for worms. Well, now, I'll tell you this. In the early spring, like, say, in April and May, the worms jump out of the ground. I mean, all you got to do is dig one shovelful and you got 15 worms, just like that. But as each succeeding day goes by, the worms get scarcer and scarcer. Where they go, who knows? They go deeper. And they get very hard to get. And about this time of the year, they're starting to it's getting really right down to the wire, If the old man wants a can of worms, it's going to take 3 days of digging. Well, all right. I go through my 10th year, and every day I'm digging the worms, and I know where the worms are and where they're not. And I'm 11 now. I'm reading. I'm beginning to read stuff like truss ads and stuff in the back of the paper, and I'm reading things. And I'm reading popular mechanics, and it was this great article on worms. Told how to grow worms and how to grow them in the basement. You don't have to dig; you can just grow them. If you get the right kind of worms, you can grow worms in the basement. You have a supply of worms all summer. And so I went down to Oschenschlager's grocery store, and I got myself some wooden crates, which it said you had to get. You drill holes in the bottom, you get yourself some black dirt, and various other ingredients, which I will not tell you, because these worm secrets you keep to yourself, because you never know when this business might collapse, and I'm in the worm business, and I'm going to have the best damn worm place in the world, man, when I get back in business. And so you line these crates with this stuff, and then you plant your worms. You got yourself maybe 40 or 50 worms. You plant your worms, and then every day you feed them. And I will not tell you what you feed them. There are certain things worms, friends, go absolutely ape over. You know, it's kind of touching to see the worms every day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They come to the surface and they wait for you to feed them because they're hooked on this stuff that you give them. They love it. Oh, yeah, they sit there with their little faces looking out of the ground there. And, it's kind of fun, too. And you get kind of involved with them. And so every day I would be feeding the worms. And the worms are growing, everything. But then would come that terrible moment. It's Friday, and I got to pull all those poor little worms out of the case, and I've grown them, and stick them into a Heinz tomato can, and give them to the old man to feed to the crappies. Well, but then, of course, business is business. And so the whole summer goes by, and it's a pretty tough scene, growing these worms, though. It's not as easy as it sounds. And then there was this other great article. The year after that, I am 12. And it said, magic electrical method for extracting worms from the ground where they don't even have worms. And I sat there. Have you ever read an article in a magazine, how to do an article that actually changed your life? So many of these articles, you just read them. How to lose 50 pounds, you read it. How to gain 50 pounds, you read it. How to fly by flapping your arms, by Norman Vincent Peale, you read it. You just say, you don't do much about it, you just read it. I read this article, I'll tell you, my eyeballs are popping. And it said that you go down to the junkyard. You go down to the junkyard. And you ask the guy at the junkyard, says, it can be obtained at any junkyard. Ask them for a Ford Spark coil. You got it? What is it, a Ford Spark coil? Well, you go to the junkyard, they know. And so I go down to the junkyard, the Greeks, and I go down there, and I said, I want a Ford Spark coil. He said, what do you want it for? You going to electrocute somebody? I said, no, I am not going to electrocute anybody. By the way, that occurred to me then. I never thought about it that way. Immediately, I thought of about 5 kids I'd like to electrocute. And he says, no, I am not going to electrocute anybody. He says, well, you want one that works? And I said, I do. And he says, that'll be $0.25. Well, I'm making dough on the worms. I'm selling them to all the guys in the neighborhood, so I figure it's worth $0.25. So I rack out the 2 bits, and I got the spark coil. And then you get 2 iron pipes. You got it, friends? 2 iron pipes, which you sandpaper so that they are shiny and conduct electricity very well. You then get yourself 50 feet of rubber-covered electrical wire stranded. You can twist. And you then put handles on these pipes with tape, thick insulating tape. You got it, friends? You get yourself a couple of dry cells, which you connect in series. You hook it up to the magneto coil, the Ford Spark coil. You stick the 2 things in the ground and stand back. Well, I'll never forget the day that I plugged it into our lawn. We had this poor, sad, little struggling lawn. The kind of lawn that's got little stickers and junk in it. You'd find dead frogs in it and all that. And so I stuck the thing in one end of the lawn, and I stuck it in the other. You're supposed to put it 25 feet apart. And you run the 2 cables up to the porch. What an exciting moment. I hooked up the wires. I connected up the last wire to the binding post, and the Ford Spark car went, it's jiggling.
And you never saw anything like it. Every blade of grass on the lawn stood up at attention and whistled Dixie. It was wild. Sparks are coming off the bushes, Oh, it's fantastic. Gophers are running out with hot feet. Oh, whoa, whoa. There were 3 moles. I'll tell you, I never saw moles actually run. Moles were running out and yelling across the lawn. Well, I waited about a minute and a half, and the lawn was glowing, and suddenly you could see all the grass was alive with millions of worms. I said to my kid brother, I said, "Hey, Randy, quick, run out and grab the worms. I'll run the spark coil." My kid brother runs out to the middle of the lawn, and boom! He gets knocked 30 feet right over Bruner's driveway and lands under the porch with a worm in his hand. Well, I want to tell you, that afternoon, we cleared up. We must have picked out of the lawn alone about 50,000 worms. And there is nothing more exciting than a worm who's been given a little shot of juice. He is really moving. He is an excited worm. They're all out there whistling Dixie and yelling and hollering, and I'm putting them down into my little cases. You are listening to the guy who took electricity, friends, and turned it into a tidy fortune. That summer, there were some weeks when I earned as much as, $1.50 some weeks with my worms. And I became known far and wide over the entire northern Indiana district as the Worm King, a title which I still hold and look back with a certain amount of satisfaction on. Oh, yes, no matter how low a man works deep down in the soil, there are satisfactions. There are ways to fulfill. Even the bricklayer friend is a perfectionist. You must do what you do well. And so wherever that little fink is out in Jersey, kid, you're talking to a guy who knows his worms. Teenage expert. Oh, fine. Teenage expert. Bring it up, Big. Hang loose out there. There's a lot of things under this sun, man. A lot of things. Bring it up, Big. Hit him in the face with it. Go on. Teenage expert. Ah, fink.